Hello everyone, welcome to Connecting Dots with Chewy, where we talk about the forbidden, the unknown, and the paranormal. Today I'm bringing you 3 stories that remain unsolved. On November 2, 1986, at 7:18 a.m., the ground supervisor at Evergreen Memorial Cemetery in central Missouri unlocked the small administrative office to begin preparing paperwork for the week's scheduled services. The cemetery relied entirely on handwritten ledgers to record plot assignments, burial permits, and vault placements. A fresh entry had been added overnight. The line listed Plot Section F, Row 12, Grade 4. It included a full name, date of birth, a date of burial recorded as 1:32 a.m. The entry was written in dark ink and signed with initials that did not match any cemetery employee. No burial had been scheduled. The cemetery gates had been locked at dusk the previous evening. There were no night staff assigned. The only access point was secured with a heavy chain and a padlock, and no keys were missing from the office. The supervisor walked to Section F. The soil at Grade 4 appeared recently disturbed. The grass was flattened in a rectangular shape consistent with excavation equipment. However, there were no tire tracks on the nearby service road and no footprints in the damp earth from the light rain that had fallen just before midnight. When the workers probed the ground with metal rods, they encountered resistance approximately 6 feet down, consistent with the burial vaults. No burial permit had been filed with the county clerk for that plot. County records were checked. The name listed in the ledger belonged to a woman who had died in 1974 and was buried in another state. Her grave location was verified through archived documents. The initials on the cemetery entry did not match any former or current groundkeeper. The ink used was the same brand that was kept in the office supply drawer. The pen itself was missing when the inventory was taken later that morning. The supervisor ordered the grave to remain undisturbed pending further instructions. Law enforcement was notified but declined to exhume without formal complaint or next of kin requests. Over the next week, the soil at Grave 4 settled naturally, as if a ball had been placed and backfilled properly. No headstone was ever installed. The plot remains unmarked. The ledger page is still stored at the cemetery archive. It documents a burial record at an hour when the gates were locked. No service was scheduled. No official permit existed for the grave that appears to have been filled. The next story is an unsolved case where a mysterious man was found murdered in the beach. In the early hours of December 1st, 1948, the body of an unidentified man was discovered laying against a seawall on Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia. He appeared well dressed, wearing a suit, pressed shirt. There were no signs of violence, no visible wounds, and no indication of struggle. At first glance, it looked as though the man had simply laid down and died quietly. When the police examined the body, they found something deeply unusual. Every label had been carefully removed from his clothing. There was no wallet, no identification, no personal papers, no marks that could easily trace him to a home or a workplace. His fingerprints were taken, but they matched no records in Australia or internationally. Despite an extensive search, no missing persons reported seemed to fit him. The autopsy raised even more questions. The man was physically fit, with strong calves and feet that suggested he had been athletic or a dancer. His organs were congested, particularly his spleen and liver, which pointed towards possible poisoning. However, toxicology tests at the time failed to identify any known poison. The coroner could not determine a clear cause of death and officially ruled it as unknown. Weeks later, investigators made a discovery that transformed one of the most famous mysteries in Australian history. Hidden in a small sewn pocket inside the men's trousers was a tiny rolled piece of paper with the words Tamamshud. Tamamshud. Printed on it. The phrase was Persian and translated roughly to ended or finished. To a rare editor of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Months after the discovery of the note, a man came forward claiming he had found a copy of the Rubaiyat in the backseat of his unlocked car. Around the time of death, the final page had been torn out, matching the paper found on the body. Inside the book was a strange series of letters arranged in lines appearing to be some kind of code. Despite efforts by the military intelligence and cryptography experts, the code was never conclusively deciphered. The mystery deepened when the police located a nurse named Jessica Thompson who lived near the beach. She admitted to owning a copy of the Byeee and had once given it to a man whose identity she refused to explain. When shown a plaster cast of the deceased man's face, she reportedly appeared shocked and distressed, nearly fainting. She denied knowing him, yet her reaction raised suspicion that she recognized him. Over the decades, theories multiplied. Some believed the Somerton Man was a spy during the early Cold War, using coded messages and untraceable poisons. Others suggested a tragic love story, a suicide staged to appear mysterious, or an intelligence operation gone wrong. In 2022, DNA analysis suggested the man may have been an electrical engineer from Melbourne, but even this breakthrough failed to answer the central questions. Why was he carrying a cryptic message? Why were all identifying marks removed? And who was he meeting on the night he died? More than 70 years later, the Somerton Man remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases in modern history. His name, his purpose, and the meaning of the code found with him are still unknown. The case remains officially unresolved. The next story comes from Japan, deep in the forest, where a ranger disappears. On September 28, 1994, at 1:30 a.m., a volunteer search team operating handheld radios in the foothills of Mount Fuji briefly intercepted a transmission on the old forestry frequency once used by the Akoihara Ranger Station. The station had been closed since 1989. The small wooden ranger cabin had served as a monitoring point for hikers entering the forest trails. After funding cuts and declining use, the forestry office removed the equipment and sealed the building. The last ranger assisted to the cabin was Kenji Sato. According to the police records, Sato disappeared during the night patrol of October 1988. His radio was later recovered near a trail marker several kilometers from the cabin. No other trace of him was ever found. 6 years later, during a nighttime search operation for a lost hiker, the volunteer team began hearing interfaces across the radios shortly after 1:30 a.m. At 1:36 a.m., a clear transmission broke through the static. The voice was male and calm. It repeated a short phrase in Japanese 3 times. Team members later described the words as sounding like routine ranger check-in. The signal ended abruptly. The team leader attempted to respond on the same frequency, asking the caller to identify himself. No reply was ever received. Radio technicians later traced the signal strength to somewhere within 2 kilometers of the old ranger cabin site. Police officers were sent to the location later that morning. The cabin stood in the same condition it had been left years earlier. The windows were boarded. The padlock on the door was shown no signs of tampering. When the door was opened for inspection, the interior was covered in dust and fallen leaves blown through the cracks in the walls. The radio console that once operated inside the building had been removed in 1989. No power lines were ever connected into the cabin. Technicians confirmed that without both equipment and electric power, the station could not have transmitted a signal on the forestry frequency. The search team's radio recording still exists in the archives. It captures a brief voice transmission on a channel assigned to a ranger station that had been abandoned for years, spoken from somewhere inside a forest where the last ranger assigned to that station had disappeared with no explanation. So, after hearing all these stories, what do you guys think? Do you guys believe any of these were true? Do you believe they could remain unsolved? Or do you think they can be solved? Let me know your thoughts and comments, and let me know if you want to hear more stories, more mysteries, more paranormal stories. So this was Connecting the Dots with Chewy, where we talk about the forbidden, the unknown, and the paranormal. See you guys.